Hey Jesse, is that you?
Hello, hello.
How you doing, brother?
Doing well. Let me get switched to my
Yeah,
phones here. Can you hear me?
yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Man,
All right. Wow. Well, we're live on Twitch as we go, so we're ready to go. I just want to first off introduce you to the stream. Yeah, Jesse Winton, the current actor, former the filmmaker, director, writer of the movie Targeted, exposing the gun control agenda, came out in 2016. It was available on Netflix for some time. I think it's still available on YouTube and Amazon Prime, if I'm not mistaken. Hate to advertise it, but we got to talk about it. So
sure.
yeah.
Yeah,
But no, first off, thank you so much for agreeing to come on and connecting with me. It's really a pleasure.
yeah. I'm very excited. It's been a while since it's been a while since anyone has really talked about it, to be honest. So it's kind of fun to bring it back up every once in a while and get a chance to kind of go through and dissect it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because people like you. I really want to get to know people like you and your experiences and what you've gone through. So, just for streaming purposes, I want the audience to check out the trailer of the movie before we get started. So it's about 30 seconds. We'll go ahead and watch this trailer for the audience.
Sight today of a mass shooting.
Evil's in our hearts, not in the guns. If you can take a person's firearm away, you can take anything away from them.
Why did the government do this?
To get, keep, and expand power.
If we don't stand up against tyranny, we won't have freedom.
I really like the epic music in that trailer. It's actually pretty good.
Oh man,
But
man.
but yeah, I know.
Oh, it's so cringy looking back on it now because I mean, so many reasons, but it's
But
just like it. I feel like it took itself way too seriously. Like I think I definitely took myself way too seriously, and then tried to make this big cinematic. You know, it's so bad. It's really bad. And it in spite of trying to be cinematic or whatever, it still ended up just kind of a shilly, hacky piece of propaganda. And so, I mean, it's definitely. I look back on it as there's a lot of interesting things that I learned, and um, a lot of ways that I've grown from the point when we started producing it until now, and so many ways that I've changed politically. But I think generally speaking, it has a lot of still personal value for me because of just kind of what it ended up inspiring and where I am now, and that I don't know if I would be where I am politically today were it not for the film.
and it's really to me it what it sounds like, it's like reading an old high school paper that you wrote, and it's like, wow, was I really like that back in high school?
Mm,
But
yeah.
but
Uh huh.
I want to actually kind of get to know you first,
Yeah.
early on before the movie was made. So talk to us about your political philosophy growing up, what your history was, where did you come from, a conservative family? Have at it,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah. So I was actually raised in a very conservative um, Christian household. My dad was a pastor for probably about 10 to 12 years of my life, and he'd been a pastor for 5 to 10 years before I was born. So a lot of his life, he was a pastor. And so I was raised in probably your traditional evangelical conservative Christian home. And just I can't even tell you how I got interested in politics. I've been interested in politics for a long, long time. I think some of it came from driving to and from places with my dad, and he would have Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity on, and I just really liked listening to these people talk. And so then, I'm 12, 13 years old out on a riding lawnmower, and I would have my own talk radio show, and I would just be kind of regurgitating all of these different things that I was hearing from the Hannitys and the Limbaughs of the world. And over time, it just kind of morphed into more of a fascination with the actual kind of nitty gritty of policy. And I had a friend who was also a documentary filmmaker, that asked me to come on board just to help him out for a few days for a shoot that he was doing in Northern California for a documentary that he had crowdfunded that he was making on environmental issues. It was called, I can't even remember what it's called now. I think it was called Axed. And it was kind of, I would say, in a similar vein to my film, trying to look at environmental issues through this lens of some kind of broader government conspiracy, if you will. And so in that process, I kind of had been interested in film for a little while, and then this was kind of this merging of these two interests that I had of politics and of film. And so I got the idea, hey, I should do something like this. And I ended up getting my dad on board. My dad was the executive producer. And we kind of farmed it out for probably 6 months or so, tried to do a crowdfunding campaign, didn't get anywhere with it, and saw an old friend at the time that we hadn't seen in a few years in an event. And he was working with the production company Pureflix at the time, and the people that were kind of behind the fundraising for that. And he said, basically, we've got another company that we're looking to kind of find films and finance. And so why don't you fly out here? He was in South Carolina. He said, why don't you fly out here and pitch us your movie? And so we flew out. We're there for 2 days, had a phone conference with him and one of his partners, and they ended up kind of giving it the go ahead. And so we started producing, targeted in, I believe it was December of 2014. But to that point, I had spent probably a good year to a year and a half kind of brainstorming and thinking through the take on the issues and how I felt about it. But again, kind of going back to it, ultimately looking back, I see it now as being very much this kind of regurgitation of things that I had always been raised to believe, rather than my own kind of belief system and formulating my own thoughts on the matter. And so, that's how I feel like it's really been a growing experience and a learning experience, is looking back on it and seeing, that's what I used to believe. And there was, very little evidence for anything that I even put forth in the movie. But looking now and being really critical about the way that I approach issues and making sure that as much as possible, I'm approaching things in a way that is, not something that I'm going to look back on in 10 years and be like, oh, there's absolutely no facts or evidence to back up any of what I believe.
And why guns? You came from an evangelical Protestant background. Why did you pick guns? Was guns one of your most passionate political issues at the time?
So I feel like it was more just an issue of marketability. Honestly, like it was kind of where's the money going to be right now? And this was when we first started thinking through it, it was within a year of Sandy Hook, 2 or 3 years of the Aurora, Colorado shooting. And there was a lot of, this was also still the Obama era. So this was, for conservatives, it was the end of days. And we were thinking, oh, Obama's going to, I would hear people say, like, Obama wants your guns, Obama wants your freedom, Obama's going to take away your health care, Obama's blah, 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 all these things. He's going to turn us into a socialist, the socialist country. And so I just said, guns is a really kind of hot button issue right now. And so we figured there would be a lot of marketability, but, I was not raised around guns per se. I mean, we had a gun in the house when I was a kid. And my dad hunted for about 3 years of my life, and then he kind of gave it up and moved into other hobbies. But I wasn't really I was not raised around guns. It was just kind of, there's a gun in the house. I was told if you ever touch it, basically we'll beat your ass. Don't touch the gun. Never touched it. I knew that it was dangerous, but it wasn't like I grew up with guns everywhere. And so it was just this passionate issue that I was really concerned about and really cared about. It was it was literally just a question of what's going to be the most marketable thing and what's something that people are really talking about right now that I can find a way to be interested in. And it ended up being guns.
And it's interesting that you say that, because you came off as being this real passionate, gun nut, for lack of a better term, because after the first couple of minutes of the movie, there it is. You're sitting there with a rifle shooting the gun off. So
Mm-hmm.
you came off as like, oh, this is a kid that was raised with a rifle and, had a rifle at birth, kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think it's a chicken or the egg thing. It was definitely there were plans at one point to go through the whole process of buying an AR-15 in California in the context of the film and actually showing that. So that AR that I'm shooting in the trailer that I also shot in the film, we didn't end up shooting that, but that was something that I bought kind of in order to become more engrossed in guns and have more familiarity with it. So I would, after I got that, we'd shoot a fair amount. We'd shoot, every couple of weeks. We had friends with property, and we'd drive somewhere and shoot. But yeah, it really, really came about. I would say that while we were producing it, I definitely was very into and interested in guns, but I didn't start out that way. But it wasn't a situation of purely because this is marketable and people are talking about it, I'm now going to get into guns. It was more a case of this is the way that our film is headed, and as a result, I'm like becoming more interested in and more passionate about guns and finding more time to shoot and finding more ways to increase the armory. But yeah, it's a weird time of life looking back on it now, for sure.
Now, in the movie, you do interview quite a few people that are still known to this day. Some politicians, some competition gun shooters. What, looking back now, hindsight's 2020. What do you think is like the most disturbing thing about some of the pro Second Amendment people that you interviewed?
I think that the thing that really bothers me, because I was this way looking back now, it's less about the politics and it's less about the actual instruments of guns. To me, the most disturbing thing is the complete lack of any sort of empathy for any victims of mass shootings and victims of gun violence. The opening 5 or 7 minutes of Targeted, I had a voiceover that I wrote where we showed this clip of Obama after Sandy Hook where he was on the lectern and he was weeping. And I had written initially, fortunately, our producers kind of gave the axe on it, and they were like, that's a little too far. You probably shouldn't say that. But I said something like, President Obama squeezed out tears and politicians gave impassioned speeches. And it's just there. It's completely devoid of any sort of empathy for the humanity of any of these people that either were killed or lost someone in a mass shooting that we were directly talking about. We were talking about Sandy Hook was kind of where we started. But talking to these people like the Mike Huckabees of the world, and I think they've really, really showed their kind of their true colors now in the last 3 or 4 years under Trump. That there is a complete disregard for anything other than their ideological perspectives and things that benefit them and things that make them either money, give them an audience, or stir up some sort of controversy that widens their field of influence. And so kind of the cavalier way that we would talk about gun violence or that we would talk about these victims of shootings, it's really bothersome to me now. And it's something that I feel very guilty for.
So when they say thoughts and prayers, they're full of shit.
Oh my God. Yeah,
I knew it. You see,
absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
what got me to become like an uber, like I had no real thoughts. I used to shoot guns. There's videos of me shooting guns when I was younger, but once Sandy Hook happened, I became an ardent, gun grabber, so to speak, because of the fact that
Yeah.
not only were people not empathetic towards children, they were also saying that it was a conspiracy. It didn't even happen. And that to me was just, that was it. That was the straw that broke the camel's back. So for you to say that and to expose that is, I think you've done a lot of good by exposing that. And I want to commend you for exposing that, because that's a difficult thing to say, because I imagine these are people that, that contributed to a project that you were passionate about. So for you to actually admit that, I think that's awesome. But
Thank you.
But one of the things that while you were filming the movie and as you were getting more into guns, why did you think the way that you thought about gun control activists? Like what turned you into like attacking the gun control lobby?
It's kind of difficult to specify, I think. I along with being raised in a conservative evangelical home, there was a lot of a very specific breed of history and historical understanding. It was very, literalist interpretation of the Constitution, and so when I looked at, and also people that I had spent time hanging around and that I was, friends with. I don't want to put all of it on my upbringing. And I think that there comes a point in your life where you have to take responsibility for the things that you believed. And by the time we were making this, it absolutely was me. But I think the people that I had been surrounded by and surrounded myself with were all very, very much in that same vein of traditional, kind of fundamental understandings of history and the Constitution. And so when I looked at something like the gun issue, it wasn't a case of, oh man, there's two sides to this. Let me dig into this. I didn't approach this film with like any sort of journalistic intent. Like we're actually going to dig in, or even really a documentarian's intent. It was a case of, I know what I want to get to, and so we're going to go out there and we're going to find these people that will prove this point for us, that have credibility and have some sort of ability to authoritatively speak on this to a particular audience. And we reached out to organizations in Chicago that were trying to end gun violence, and we reached out to Dianne Feinstein's office and I want to say Nancy Pelosi's office as well, because at that time Dianne Feinstein for sure was very much a leader on the national movement against guns, and we reached out to them. And at the time when they said no, it was like it was a badge of honor. It was like, haha, Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein, they won't talk to us. And then looking back now, it was because our treatment for our film, the thing that we would send them was like a 2-page document that said, basically, we think that you're trying to destroy America, and we want to give you a chance to sit down and explain to us why you're not. And so, it didn't make any sort of sense on the one hand, but then also it was loaded. It was just this loaded approach that didn't work. But like I said, we had this kind of, Dianne Feinstein won't talk to us, and this organization to prevent infant gun violence or children killed by guns, they won't talk to us either. So that must mean we're on the right track. But it didn't come about through, I don't think, any conscious decision on my part to become, right wing or to push for traditional views on guns. It was literally just a result of what I was already involved in, who I was already talking to, and what I already thought.
So I started Googling around right after I watched the movie, and I came across your article in medium.com, and of course it's titled "Why I Regret Making Targeted."
Yeah.
And you've already gone through one of the first main points, which was the movie lacked empathy. So we've gone to that point. But another thing I wanted to discuss with you is you talk about how you're still, at the time, this is February of 2017, you're still pro-gun. So at this stage in time, where's your mindset? It seems like you're leaning over the fence at this moment. So talk to us about what was going on with you at that time when you wrote that article.
Yeah. So the film released in theaters in September of 2016. It was in about 500 theaters nationwide. And this was also right around the kind of the peak of the Trump campaign. And then ultimately, I guess a month and a half after the film came out, he won the presidential election. But I had been very, very anti-Trump for the entirety of his campaign. I didn't vote for him. I was always pretty staunchly against him. I was in 2016. I was into Rand Paul for a little bit, and then when he dropped out, I was on kind of the Ted Cruz bandwagon. Um, but I was always very staunchly anti-Trump. But through all of, I mean, I remember even before that, in middle of 2016, my views were starting to change, and they were starting to be pushed further left by the way that I was seeing conservatism breaking down, and I would say pushing towards this, really disgusting, fascistic, evil regime that we're now under. I mean, regime may be a strong word, but presidency that we're under. And I was seeing so many conservatives and Republicans that I knew shilling for Trump, and it was everything that I felt like conservatism stood against. And I look back now and I know that that's not true. I mean, I think he's very much a symptom of what the Republican Party has been for decades and decades. But specific to kind of my journey, I had already started to have some doubts about releasing the film prior to it coming out in theaters. And then it came out. Basically, no one saw it. I think it basically recouped its investment. And I was kind of left with 3 or 4 days of some really intense, going on the Glenn Beck program, and Mike Huckabee going on Fox and Friends to discuss that, and my face being on Fox and Friends. And it was like this 3 to 4 day kind of heyday. And then it just all went away. And no one was talking about it. It hadn't made any money really beyond just the recuperation of its investment. For a little bit of time, the NRA was very heavily involved. And so, funny sidetrack on that. We interviewed Chris Cox, who was the head of the what is it called? Basically their lobbying organization at the NRA, and we had interviewed him. He was the president of that organization. And about a month and a half to 2 months before the film was going to come out in theaters, the NRA, they had also made a partnership with us. They were going to buy tons of DVDs and Blu-rays, and they said, we'll sell them out basically right away. Like, we'll clear house on inventory, which was a huge financial boost potentially. And then about, I don't know, probably 2 months, 3 months before the film was slated to release, we get an email that basically said, hey, we need you to pull Chris Cox's interview, and we have to kind of bow out of this, and we can't really be involved anymore. And what's funny about this is Chris Cox is famously the guy that tried to mount a coup within the National Rifle Association to get Wayne LaPierre kicked out and take over as the CEO and head of the NRA. So I don't want to, throw out anything that is not, I can't prove that. I'm not trying to say that they were connected. It's just very interesting, and it's very kind of funny, the timing and all of that. But back to the main point. Yeah, so when the film came out, I had already started to have a lot of reservations about what I thought and how I felt about politics and how I felt about the film. And so then in early 2017, when I wrote that article, I was actually sitting at my grandparents' house, And I had just had this nagging feeling that I needed to put something out there to just say how I felt. So at that point, I still was pro-gun, um, and I feel like I probably would have called myself a kind of a traditional libertarian at that point. So I was still for guns, but I was realizing how little empathy anything that I believed had, and the fact that there really were not a whole lot of facts to back up the way that I approached the issue. And so I wrote that piece and just put it out on my own personal Medium page. Um, but about, I don't know, an hour after I posted it and shared it to my Twitter, um, Tom Colicchio, I think is his name, or Colicchio. He was he's
Top
a
Chef
celebrity
guy?
chef. Yeah, from Top Chef. He retweeted it because I said, I regret making Targeted, and he retweeted it and he basically said, good, I'm glad. And yeah, and it ended up, I feel like within a couple hours, there were a few hundred to a couple thousand views on the page, and people read it. And it's nowhere near the audience that saw it. But, it was a little validation of like, okay, this felt like the right decision. And then, okay, people are reading it and seem to be responding well to the piece.
Yeah, and coming across this is it's kind of astounding, especially on this issue, to hear somebody kind of start to make that turn. And you also mentioned that you judged the motives of the gun control lobby as evil. Can you
Mhm.
expand a little bit on that as to how did the people that you were involved with, the pro gun people, how do they really feel about the gun control people?
I think they see them all as a bunch of crazy psycho fearmongers. Um, and then, I look back now, and on the one hand, we have people who own gun stores in our film. It's like the people who own gun shops, and Mike Huckabee, who is a Fox News contributor, and so they stand to profit off of the gun lobby, and the National Rifle Association, and we interviewed people from the National Association for Gun Rights, and so you have those people on one side, and then on the other side you have literally mothers of school-aged children that are out marching saying, I don't want my kid to have to go through an active shooter drill at school at the age of 4. And so you want to talk about psycho fearmongers, it's the people on the right that preached for 8 years under an Obama presidency, Obama is coming for your guns. And
It never
I think
happened.
it's really interesting to note, if the NRA and the gun lobby was purely interested in gun rights, then they should have, under Trump, just withered away. There's no need for them. They
Hmm.
they have a president who is incredibly safe on guns. But the thing is that they are a business. They have to sell fear. And that's exactly what they do. And so if it's not the government's coming for your guns, it becomes the liberals are coming for your country. And so it continues to foment this undue sense of divisiveness and undue sense of fear that at the end of the day benefits them, but it's really weaponized ignorance
Wow.
is what it is. It is. The pro gun arguments fall apart as soon as you bring data, statistics, and the experiments of most other civilized nations on Earth, most other Western nations on Earth, when it
Mhm.
comes to guns. If you bring that approach, the pro gun arguments fall apart. There's no statistical data that actually backs them up in a serious way. So you to me it loses all credibility when you can take the arguments for guns and take the arguments against guns and put them side by side. And when the pro gun arguments fall apart in no time at all, it, I find it hard to take it seriously anymore.
And you know what's funny about that is when it comes to like gun control debates and using the facts and the statistics that you mentioned, um, it, they're almost unflappable. And it brings me to my next point.
Yeah.
So we get to your blog entry. in March of 2019. Now, before I read what you wrote, because it's really entertaining, I want to tell you a story. So I work for the state government in California, and I work with some lawyers, and a lot of them are relatively young. They've spent some time in courtrooms early on in their careers, and the topic of jury duty came up. And I was a political science major. I had ambitions to become a lawyer, so I was interested in talking to him about it. And he said, "Oh, the fastest way to get bumped off of a jury is if you are a hyper religious person and or a really hardcore gun nut." And I asked him, why did you bump those people off your juries? And he says, well, it didn't really matter what the case was. I said, because those people are not impartial. They make judgments based off how people look, and they won't listen to facts or reasons at all. So we can't have them on our jury. We need people who are impartial and can be swayed by an argument. And I started laughing so hard.
Yeah.
So here we are. We have Jesse Winton in 2019, and he makes this statement. I'll slap it up on the stream here. To clear up any potential confusion moving forward, I'd like to add this statement. Fuck the NRA, take away the guns, eat the rich, insert Democratic nominees named here, 2020. What happened there, bro? I gotta hear this.
To the fuck the NRA, take away the guns, eat the rich.
Yeah, how did you get there? From 2017 blog post in about 2-year period, how did you get to that point?
Oh man. I don't want to give Trump and the Trump presidency too much credit. But I don't know how to separate it. It was seeing this deep dive into not just really shitty politics and really shitty policy, but this deep dive into the presidency of a man who literally started his campaign by calling Mexicans rapists. That's where he began. And then you watched the Republican Party and conservatives, and even a lot of Christian conservatives. I mean, 86% of white evangelicals voted for Donald Trump in 2016. And watching this kind of destruction of what I think I saw as the basic human decency of a lot of people that were Republicans into fully supporting a white supremacist president, trying to find a way to justify why the Nazis being very fine people actually makes sense if you give it more context, which it doesn't. But watching how strongly everyone took this hard turn to the far right. Even I remember on Inauguration Day watching Richard Spencer and the kind of leaders of the alt-right saying, "Hail Trump, hail our country," and then doing Nazi salutes and being like, these are literally the people that have been waiting for Trump for years. And then all of these people who have labeled themselves as moderate conservatives and moderate Republicans for years have now fully jumped on this bandwagon, and they are, whether they like it or not, they are bedfellows with the alt-right and neo-Nazis in America and the KKK. There's no way to get around that. And so it kept pushing me further and further and further left. And then I started, on like the eat the rich kind of perspective, I've definitely moved even further left than I was when I wrote that. Like I was big Warren fan for a little while in last summer when the presidential campaign really kicked up for the Democrats, and then I was really back in Bernie for the last 3 or 4 months. But I would say so much of it is connected to being so repulsed by what I was seeing from conservatism that it caused me to reevaluate, like, okay, so if Ronald Reagan is shitty on culture, is he also shitty on economics? And so then digging very, subtly, like not spending all of my, I'm not like an economics major, an economics professor or anything, if you will, but just taking time to be like, okay, so I disagree with these people on all of these other things. Do I agree with them on economics? Do I agree with them on abortion? Do I agree with them on immigration laws? How do I feel about these things? And so it was this real push to educate myself, just to be able to push back on what I was seeing from the Trumpists, and then finding myself more and more going, I agree with this. Like, this makes sense to me. And again, so much of it comes back down to, I think, wanting to find a sense of empathy in the way that we approach policy. And, however you feel about any of the candidates for the Democratic presidency, or the Democratic nomination, um, all of them were really driven at some level by a sense of empathy. Um, and so it's very refreshing to see, after 4 years of neo-fascism, um, seeing people standing on a stage like a Bernie Sanders saying, my campaign slogan is not me, us, as opposed to this radical, disgusting individualism that has so identified the right for the last 4 years, is just a very refreshing thing. And so it was very easy for me to get on board with that.
Well, you mentioned 86% of evangelicals voted for Trump, and you described
Mhm.
yourself as an like, you seem like the last person that would be swayed because of Trump. What do you think separates you from, I guess, the standard evangelical gun lover that's a Trumpist?
So I would say a lot of it is that I'm an atheist at this point. I mean, it was kind of a wholesale rejection of a lot of what I was raised in. Um, but yeah, so seeing lots of Christian friends or people that I knew kind of going hardcore for Trump, it was like, okay, something's not right here. And that same idea of like, okay, so I'm gonna look into other perspectives and try and deepen my knowledge on this issue, so that I'm not just, I was raised Christian, therefore I am Christian. And I went in very willing to stay a Christian, and I just ended up doing more research and came out and just realized I don't see that. I don't believe that anymore. Um, but it was all a matter of trying the best that I could to educate myself and learn and listen to other people. And I think that that's something that's so important and so necessary in political discourse today, is um, trying new things and looking at what is going to be the best solution for this country, and is going to be the most empathetic solution that gives people the best quality of life, and actually gives us an ethical and just society.
Now, this is a question that that I've been like so wanting to ask you,
Yeah.
is how do you recommend liberals like me approach gun nuts that would sway them? Like, what was the one thing specifically about gun politics that swayed you, that you learned?
Oh, damn. Um, oh God, that's such a hard question.
We can get back
I
to it if
feel
it takes.
like I no, I feel like, to some extent, not to keep harping on empathy, but I think it takes a certain level of, for the average gun owner, I don't see them as being vile, vindictive, and disgusting like I would see the NRA. I think most of them have their sense of what is right, and the way to approach people like that, I think, is to say, tell me what it is about gun control that makes you scared. Tell me what it is about having that gun that makes you feel safe. And the hope would be that if you were talking to a decently rational person, that they would be able to give you those reasons and then listen if you respond with, you know, if they say gun, it makes me feel safer when I'm in my home, that I can defend myself if someone breaks in my house. To be able to say I fully understand that. I understand that impulse. But statistically speaking, you are significantly more likely to shoot or to hurt or kill yourself or hurt or kill someone else in your family than you are to ever use it to um, kill an intruder.
Or win the lottery.
And yeah, exactly. And I mean, coming at it from that perspective of listening and knowing that I think a lot of them are misguided. I mean, I obviously disagree with them fairly strongly. I think that a lot of them are misguided and are not really living in a world of facts. But understanding these people have a certain fear or insecurity that the presence of this gun in their home is filling or alleviating. But I mean, and I don't even know if that's a holistic answer. Like, that's the best that I can come up with right now is just like on certain things, there's absolutely no room for empathy. I have no empathy for the KKK. I have no empathy for the alt-right. I have no empathy for white supremacy. But I can be reasonably understanding at the very least of someone that is like, I'm afraid that gun control is going to take away my freedom. I can listen to that. I can be empathetic of that. I disagree with it. I can tell them how much I disagree with it, but I can at least give them a modicum of understanding.
Now, you talked about, that gun filling a hole. I'm a vocal critic. Yeah, that gun filling a hole, like it's filling a hole in your life and stuff like that. It's one of
Sure.
it's one of the main things I critique about gun culture in America is, I mean, to me, let's face it, like it's not for you to feel safe. Like I was a prison guard for about 4 years, and I have a lot of conservative friends. Most of them are gun nuts, and one of the things that astounded me, and hopefully you can relay this or reflect on this, is they are so like looking for that. It's like, I hope someone breaks into my house so I can take a shot at him. So to me, did you sense that from a lot of people? Like it was almost like they had this gun because they really wanted to use it. I mean, who buys something that they're going to lock away and quote unquote hope I never have to use it, right?
Yeah. I thought that way. I mean, and this is why I said it's the best I could come up with off the top of my head, because I think you're absolutely right on that too, that there's some sort of macho John Wayne sense of manliness that, you know, not manliness per se, but just some sort of macho, Green Beret Navy SEAL sense of I can take someone out if they're if I have a concealed carry permit and I'm at the mall and someone comes in with a gun and starts shooting people, I'm not going down without a fight. And just like statistically speaking, you are.
Well, that's the thing. Like, I always tell people, like, shooting at a paper target is not going to train you for a gunfight, my friend.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
A- a lot of this is like really revealing, and it's funny. Like, I have this list of questions to ask you, and you answer like three of them in one. So I'm just like, wow,
I'm
man.
glad I can make it more efficient.
Yeah. But what do you think? Like, I know you talked a lot about empathy, but what do you think that the pro gun people can learn from the left? Like, what's the biggest thing that they can learn?
Oh man. Um yeah, see, it's funny because I think that starts to come down to like a policy discussion or like discussion of just pure logic and facts and reasoning, because empathy can only get you so far, if you will. Like it will only get you as far as people are willing to let you go. Um but I think that what they can learn is a sense of openness and willingness to not necessarily be proved wrong, but a willingness to listen to other perspectives and to, I think something that people on the left have done really well, not specific to guns necessarily, but have done really well over the last few years, is really diagnosing or trying to understand what is it that has caused the Trump era. And he has this very appealing sense of right-wing populism, and he appeals to the working class person that feels like they're never heard, and feels like, for 8 years under Obama, I couldn't recognize my country. And whether or not that's rational or not, which obviously it's not, but you can't really you can't walk up to someone and slap them and say, you didn't lose your country, you just be fine, walk away. They're still going to think that. Um, but I think that what we've started to do a lot better, even more recently, but have done really well, is just listening and just trying to understand why do these people think the way that they think. So I think that probably what I would say to people on the right to learn from the left is, we're not out to get you. Like, I am pretty much against I'm against all non-regulated private gun ownership. I'm against AR-15s, like any sort of assault weapon, completely against. Totally ban them in this country. I don't want to destroy America. I have no ability to take your guns away from you and then throw you into a gulag for being conservative. And that's the mindset that my film had. Was, I mean, we had this whole section in there that was completely ahistorical, but basically said Adolf Hitler took the guns away from the Jews, and then within 15 to 20 years, they were in concentration camps. Look what gun control gets you. And aside from just being completely devoid of any history, that's not the lesson of the Holocaust. And it should never have been the lesson of the Holocaust to push back against gun control. And it's really disgusting and gross that that's in something with my name on it. And I am fully cognizant and aware of that. But
go ahead.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Well, I was going to say that when you talk about like listening to the other side, the reason why we're both here right now is because I said, okay, I've got this documentary. It's on my Netflix to watch list. It's pro guns. I'm anti-gun. I'm going to take a look and I'm going to listen to it. And the funniest thing is, like, as a movie unto itself, I was like, okay, it's a pretty good job, pretty good editing. It's got kind of a decent pace. But I honestly I honestly was like, well, if this is what the pro-gun lobby is presenting as, because I didn't know how big it was. I didn't do any research on it, on how well it did in the theaters or anything like that. And to me, it just didn't, like, it didn't hit the nail on the head. And there's always arguments, on both sides of the issue. And it just seems like, it just seems like you said, they need to listen a little bit more instead of being so close-minded. But then again, it's difficult because it's kind of like conservatism that's baked into the cake. They're kind of stubborn naturally. So
yeah. And I mean, I feel like there's a decent argument to be made for the right to bear arms on a constitutional basis. I mean, obviously that's been debated for decades in America. There's a good argument there. And one that's worth having. Debating whether or not the government taking away your guns is going to mean there's going to be another Holocaust is just a non-starter. But it's talked about in, like, that's not a particularly fringe view, even in modern conservative, thought leaders, the Dennis Pragers and the Charlie Kirks and Candace Owens of the world. It's not all that far off from the types of things that they say. I mean, I don't watch a ton of PragerU, but it would not surprise me to hear that PragerU talked about the Holocaust and the guns that were taken away before the Holocaust. It's a shitty argument. It's not a good argument.
But I mean,
Um,
I see it on my Facebook feed all the time, man. It's got to be true, bro. Don't you know?
I mean, it's appealing as hell. It really really gets the job done
Well,
because
you mentioned some key names, right? Like Prager and Kirk and Candace Owens, and you were
Mhm.
probably around similar people. How much of that is an act, or do these people really believe that they're going to get thrown in a gulag?
I don't know honestly. It's hard to even make that distinction. Because on the one hand, you've got, look at the fundraisers or how they're making their money, and my understanding of PragerU is that they're funded by billionaires that own a fracking corporation.
Mhm.
So when they have pro fracking, anti climate change videos, I don't know how seriously to take that. And the
Mhm.
same thing for guns. Like, do does Charlie Kirk really believe that, or Candace Owens really believe that if gun control is enacted, they're going to come door to door and throw people that they don't like in prison because they're thought police? I can't tell you that. Like, that's the scary thing, though, is I don't know. Like, it's not easy to look at them and be like, "Oh, that's just an act," because everything that they do is so centered and focused around these really irrational politics. And so I can't even tell if it's an act sometimes. Um, Same thing with Candace Owens with the comments that she made recently about, Hitler being basically good until he tried to globalize.
Yeah.
Does she actually believe that, or is it a grift? You you don't know. But that's the part that makes them so scary is they have these humongous bases.
Yeah.
They say these things that should get someone completely, canceled forever. And they still have these huge bases and these massive shows and people listen to them. And they also, whether they believe it or not, it is profitable for them to sell those feelings and those emotions and that fear.
So it sounds like the NRA and the gun lobby, they're selling fear to rake in profits in terms of in terms of gun sales and ammunition sales. That sounds like what you're leaning towards.
Sure. I mean, that's definitely my interpretation. I don't know how else to look at it. I mean, like I said, if they were purely concerned with gun rights, then they would not have, been as involved in politics for the last 4 years as they have been. But they have. They've been. I mean, I remember all those videos of Dana Lesh, saying the fist of truth or whatever to the New York Times and mainstream media. Um, that was from the National Rifle Association. Like, if you like, why the fuck are you still involved in politics if all you care about is gun rights? No one's coming for your guns in any meaningful way right now. Back up. Like, that should be an ideal world for the NRA. But they still maintain this very, very big national presence and are surrounded by controversy. And it's because they're a business at the end of the day. They have to be a business. And the way that they can make money and the way that they actually profit is by selling people in some way, shape, or form. You're about to lose something because of liberals. And the thing that will defend you and protect you is the National Rifle Association and the guns that you buy from the people that fund us. It's this vicious cycle, and I think that I don't know how else to parse it honestly, other than that.
It, it sounds so amazing hearing this because you've been involved with the NRA, and what are some things you can tell us about the NRA um some maybe some little secrets or some just things you picked up about the type of
Ooh.
people that work there.
Um, I mean, we were at the headquarters of the NRA for a half a day. I didn't have a ton of time around them. Um, but I know that at the end of the day, I can't say that they know what they're doing per se, but I think they do. Like, I think that maybe they believe it deep down that gun rights are important, but I think they know that the thing that sells is the controversy. and the thing that sells is the fear. And they make a push towards keeping that the main thing.
Mhm.
And again, that's, I can't confirm that. That's just the sense that I get, and the sense that I got is that somewhere deep down, they know that they are grifting, and they know that they are making profit and a business on the backs of conservatives and libertarians that are afraid of government. And that if they can continually sell them that fear of government, or that fear of the left, or fear of liberals, they're going to keep profiting. But at the same time, I mean, we've seen in the last few months that that's not necessarily true. And they're kind of in some financial trouble for sure, but which I think is a good thing. But I that's just the sense that I got, is that somewhere they know.
Well, I think we all, we all have to pay the mortgage, right? And
Hmm.
so at the end of the day, no matter what you do, you're looking out for yourself.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way I look at it is, I see them on TV all the time, and I'm like, listen, like you're a heel cutting a promo, bro. We get it, but at least, I guess, at least be swayable. But what are your thoughts? Like I saw, I actually, in research for this chat, I caught a 20-minute interview that you had done, and you talked about, the roots of the Second Amendment and things of that nature.
Hmm.
What are your thoughts on the Second Amendment now?
Short answer: repeal it. Honestly, um, my long answer is that I think it is a lot less cut and dry than people make it out to be. People on the right and people on the left. I have a difficult time believing that the founding father. I mean, there's always the consideration that at the time that the Second Amendment was written, and I don't think this invalidates it necessarily, but I think it's something to consider, the cultural context where um, the founding fathers were a bunch of white people that literally enslaved an entire race of people. And that, there's a consideration that there wasn't a sense of equity, and there wasn't a sense of fairness that they were bringing to this. And they had a misguided and skewed view of the world. And so maybe they got some things wrong. And, part of the really conservative evangelical Christian movements that I grew up in idolize the founders, and idolize the pilgrims, and idolize Christopher Columbus and all of the explorers, the Western explorers that came and civilized the Native Americans, and came and fought for states' rights in the Civil War. And I just think that they didn't get a whole lot. I mean, they didn't get everything right, and the Second Amendment is, I think, one of those things. And there's the history that the Second Amendment was at least proposed. I believe it was. I need to double check this. Like, if anyone is watching out there, fact check this, because this is just my remembrance of it. But that the Second Amendment was initially pitched as a way to make sure that militias could be armed to track down runaway slaves. That's my remembrance of it.
I'm Googling it right now.
Yeah. But that was at least a part of the discussion, and a part of the reason why the wording of a well-regulated militia was thrown in there was related to the fact that those militias were essentially um, slave patrols.
Well,
So
go ahead.
speaking today, when we talk about we can't change the Constitution has been written the way it is. I just, say, do you like the Second Amendment? And then ask them to say the second word again, amendment. It's literally written into the Constitution that we can change it. We have done it quite a few times. We gave women the right to vote, and we abolished slavery, and the 21st Amendment that
Brought back alcohol.
yeah, exactly. That we can change it, and we can change it based on the culture and the society that we live in at the time and what we are seeing, and that morality and laws are not black and white and clear cut. I think that back when the Second Amendment was written, there was a very good and necessary purpose to guns.
Mhm.
Today, we've outgrown them. We don't need them in the same way that we did. So why can't we let our understanding of the Constitution and the Second Amendment modernize with everything else? And the argument towards, well, if you're saying that, and they didn't have assault rifles back then, so they obviously couldn't have meant it. Are you saying the same thing about Twitter or Facebook? No. Like when it comes to like the free press, everyone would be like, well, the free press, they only had printing presses back then. Are you saying that they're the same? And no, I'm not. I think that guns are a unique tool that has one purpose, and it's to maim, kill, and destroy. I personally don't want a whole lot of people in a normal society to have regular access to those without severe, significant regulation. And so I think we need to, when we're approaching the topic of the Second Amendment itself, we really need to hammer in on who really cares whether it was written that way or not. Let's say that they're right. Let's give them that. Who cares? Let's change it. It makes no sense to not do something.
Well, I mean, you're making the argument that an amendment is archaic, right? I mean, there isn't a single amendment that's archaic in the Constitution, but as I recall, oh wait, the Third Amendment about quartering soldiers. My bad. My bad.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But the funny thing is I've debated the Second Amendment, and the first thing that they'll try and throw out there is shall not be infringed, and the first thing I say is, well, regulated militia. I mean, there's a reason why it's in there, but
Yeah.
you make a really compelling argument about, like, let's just ditch it and get rid of it. And
Yeah.
it's actually the argument that Alan Dershowitz made in a Intelligence Square debate. So it's something that's been on the
Sure.
table before, and I really appreciate
Mhm.
that, because it's like, hey, listen, we need to kind of revisit this kind of stuff, right? Like, this was written
Mhm.
back when 10 people with muskets could take a town,
Yeah. And
And-
I mean, at the same time, shall not be infringed. That's not something that I think most conservatives would argue is unique to the Second Amendment. A lot of them would say that applies to all of them. But at the same time, every single right that we have can be infringed at certain points by certain things. I mean, there's the famous quote of you have free speech, but free speech doesn't give you the right to yell fire in a crowded movie theater.
of course,
There are points wherein we say this right is
has limits.
your ability to express that right is putting other people in danger or doing harm to others. I think we've reached that point with the Second Amendment, that your ability to have a gun in your home and the ability to buy a gun from a gun show, or the ability to purchase a gun and not have a license to own a gun the way that we have licenses to own or to drive cars, that we've reached a point where it's idiotic not to. But it's so funny I think when we're thinking about all of these issues, that there are certain things like a driver's license that are exact parallels of guns, but we just culturally have known it to be the thing for so long. Having a driver's license, we've always understood, yeah, you have to have a driver's license to drive a car. That we're fine with it and we accept it, even as conservatives. No conservative that I know of, I mean, libertarians, but libertarians don't make any sense anyways. But libertarians might say, you don't need a driver's license. But the majority of conservatives are going to say, yeah, having a driver's license is a good thing. It makes me comfortable going out on the road, knowing that to at least a reasonable extent, everyone around me is qualified to drive a car. But we don't bring that exact same argument to guns. Like, why not? Why wouldn't we?
It's
Cars have a Yeah, go for it.
no, go ahead.
I mean, cars have a purpose, which is first and foremost transportation. If you kill someone with a car, or if a terrorist uses a car to drive through a crowd, that's tragic and that's awful. But they are misusing the car. With a gun, if a person walks into a crowded area and opens fire and kills a bunch of people, you can say that it's wrong and I would join you, but you can't say that the weapon was misused. It's used for exactly what its primary fundamental purpose is, which is to destroy and to kill. So why in hell would we not at least make it as difficult to own a gun as it is to drive a car? Like, why not? How does that not make us a safer society?
And that's been a big thing I've always harped on is the car argument, and in reverse you hear conservatives make the car argument, well, people die in cars all the time, and the one thing I have to remind them of is that if you operated your firearm the same way you operated your car every day, half the country would be dead tomorrow because
Yeah.
you're driving 70 miles an hour 2 feet from someone. You're not going to fire your gun off in the middle of the road all day long, right? So but
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah, and I mean, just again, this it's something that culturally we need to fight that kind of cultural aspect of it, if you will, um, and get people on board with this is a normal thing, this is okay, and we're not out to get you. We're not, I'm a pretty hardcore leftist. I'm not out to take guns away from conservatives because I want to silence their voice. I'm out to get guns because I don't want to die in public by a gun, and I don't want kids to get shot up in schools, and I don't want people to go to country music concerts and be shot from the 100th floor of a Las Vegas hotel. I don't want that shit happening anymore. And what's sad is that it feels sometimes like people on the left are really the only ones.
yeah.
Like, you can say all you want when you're on the right and pro gun. I don't want mass shootings to happen either. But I find it difficult to believe because there are literal steps that we can take right now that would drastically, drastically reduce the possibility that anything like that could ever happen. It wouldn't eliminate it. You can't eliminate it, but it would so bring the chances down. So to hear you say, I care about mass shootings, and then when anyone's like, oh, well, why don't we, ban fire or ban assault rifles? No, don't come for my guns. Okay, so you've suddenly in the past 2 minutes just decided you don't care about mass shootings anymore? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and that's another thing that I wanted you to bring to light was that gun culture, and you've exposed it as lacking empathy for that type of stuff, and it just seems like it just seems almost dangerous. And what are some of the things that when you were ingrained, I guess, in that gun culture, like that are dangerous about it to the average person? We've talked about how a lot of these people like are hoping that something how they hope someone breaks into their house so they can shoot them. I mean, that's
Yeah.
one aspect of it. What are some other aspects of it that people may not necessarily know about the gun culture that you would consider to be dangerous?
I mean, just the macho way that they're looked at as being like a hammer.
Yeah.
You just have them in your house, and you can use them if you need it. If you want to hang a picture, you grab the hammer. If you want to, I don't know, just put it on put a gun on your belt and go to church or whatever, just in case someone comes into your church with a gun. But I mean, I said this at the beginning, but the statistical chances are that you shoot or hurt yourself or other people in your family. That's far more statistically likely than that you ever, ever, ever use it to defend yourself in a significant way. I know people that have been carrying concealed weapons, and it went off at church. Like,
No
and
way.
like trained with firearms for years, and then it goes off in church. And fortunately, no one got hurt. Nothing really serious happened. But I'm just like, that it's so dangerous. I have a sister. I have two sisters with special needs. One of them is autistic. She's 14 now. My parents are very, very gun conscious and gun safe, but it makes me nervous that there would be a possibility that someone forgets something or something, something stupid happens, and someone gets hurt. That terrifies me. Um, and so the danger, I think, is in seeing firearms as just a tool for anything other than, like a tool for defending yourself or a tool for making yourself safer. That's really not what they do. You may think that, they don't. Um, so I think that the danger is in not listening, and the danger is in not having a broad enough understanding to see that there's maybe a better way to structure our society than the way that we have now when it comes to guns, and that maybe it would make us safer if we just try and have something different so that we're not dealing with more mass shootings than there are days in a year.
Yeah. Well, the one thing I also wanted to ask you is, you probably made a lot of friends in that period of time when you made Targeted. Um, how did your friends and family react to your new perspective?
um yeah, I don't know. Ooh, it's not really something that we've a lot of us have talked about face to face, honestly. I mean, I've had a lot of political and religious discussions with my parents over the years. With extended family, it's always just kind of been a agree to disagree, and keep it on the DL, and we're not going to talk about it. Because our my family is very loud and very talkative and very confrontational and argumentative, not in a bad way. Like, we're very willing to go into the weeds of a discussion, but sometimes it can turn sour. Um, so it's just been a there have been a couple of conversations like that, but generally speaking, we're all very respectful of each other's opinions on issues that there is room to have opinions on, like the gun issue, and we agree to disagree on it. But it doesn't mean that we ever stop talking about it. Like, we will, I'm sure myself and other people in my family will have these debates forever until we die. We're all going to be talking about these things.
Has
And I think
the
that's good.
Of course. I mean,
Hmm.
my brother is a pretty pro-gun guy, and we have these debates often. And I don't think he's ever going to really change his mind. I don't think I'm ever going to change my mind. But I guess having that balance is probably a good thing for all of us.
Hmm. Yeah.
So, um, what about the people that you interviewed, or like the production, anybody involved in the film? Have they do they know about your change perspective, and has there been any discussions with them?
Not really. No. So we had kind of a falling out with them towards the end of production. Have not really been in touch with them since then. There were some contract and legal disputes that we had for a little while, that got kind of figured out, enough where we were all satisfied. But it was kind of a situation of, we're not really going to talk to each other or really have anything to do with each other, which ultimately ended up good. Like, I don't really think that any of us would, where we are now and how public I've been, that any of us would probably really want to sit down and have a friendly discussion. I think we would probably all end up, maybe we could be cordial, I'm sure, but probably not more than that.
Now, you talked about how your movie's reach was limited, but it still had a reach.
Yeah.
During the time in which you were still pro gun and still on that bandwagon, how would you describe the reaction of the film from like the average Joe that may have reached out to you?
Um, so I have had, randomly, since it came out, even up until like a few weeks ago, I'll get notifications on Twitter of people that tag me, and it'll be like, "Hey, just saw your movie, so important, so great." And then literally 10 to 15 minutes later, without fail, I will get a reply from them that says, "I just saw your Medium article, basically fuck you." Literally, at least probably once or twice every 6 months. I'll get
Oh.
I just got one recently that was like, "I just saw Triggered and I loved it. It was so great." And I was like, "Thanks for paying attention because it's not called Triggered." But it's literally without fail people that just reach out and they're so excited by it, and then um, you know, less than half a day later, come back and they're like, "Oh, I just did some research on you. Nice job, way to go." I got an email probably about 6 weeks ago from a guy that was like that, of like, "Your film's so great," and then he emailed me back and he said, "I just saw your stuff, and I'm guessing that you had to change your mind because of pressure from powerful people," basically, is what he
Oh
said, and he was
my
like,
goodness.
"Don't apologize for what you believe. Don't go back on it. I'm guessing you're still how you are, but if not, please don't share my contact info publicly." So it I mean, it definitely gives me a laugh, but, yeah, I don't even know how to gauge the response, like, on a larger scale of people that actually saw it in the theaters. I my favorite thing that I ever got as feedback on the film was when it was on Netflix and they still had comment reviews where you could, like, write something.
Mhm.
Um, someone said, "I was sitting with my girlfriend watching this movie, and I said, 'I have guns to protect myself from Transformers.' My girlfriend laughed, but then the toaster laughed, and I got pissed."
What
And I
the
was
fuck?
like, "That's the funniest shit that I've ever seen in my life."
The
Um,
fuck?
hands down, the best feedback that I've ever gotten on that film was that one little 2 sentence comment.
Wow. Now, as you were kind of compiling the film, I have a note here, and I talked about how it had like the prototypical, cliches of the gun control. Like, the only thing that stops a good guy with a bad guy with
Mhm,
a gun is a good guy with a gun. And if they take your
mhm,
guns, what else can they take away? Um,
yeah.
you talked about obviously motivation for the film was marketing and picking that subject. How much research did you actually do before and during movie production?
It was pretty extensive. I did a lot of research, but it was all really in one vein. It was all
Mhm.
really looking to, can I prove the point that I'm trying to make? Um, so it was not stupid arguments for lack of research. It was stupid arguments for lack of openness and actual inquisitiveness and willingness to
Mm.
like approach it with an open mind. Um, but I could at the time I could you know probably lay out statistics about guns and gun violence a lot more efficiently and effectively than I could now. Um, they would just be pro gun, but I did do a lot of research. I really tried to educate myself on what I was trying to prove. Um, so I don't think it was I wasn't stupid in more than one way, if you will. Like, yeah, it was dumb trying to go find evidence to prove your point. That's just not how you have an analytical mind. But I didn't just go in saying, "Oh, I know what I know, and so now I'm going to try and prove it." And I tried. Um, I mean, I feel like now I could probably have a fairly lively debate with myself from 6 years ago. Um, but I mean, I really tried to approach it in a way that was educated on the topic.
Now, if you were to make a documentary today about gun
Yeah.
politics, what would be some of the things that you would focus on? Like, what are some of, like, I guess, like, you talked about statistics and civil, like, how other civilized societies do it. What would be like 3 bullet points that you would probably focus your another movie on?
The Second Amendment and the Second Amendment argument, because I do think that that's the strongest argument that they can make. Um, that for one. Two, the the stories and perspectives of people on the left that are anti-gun because I think that where so many people do get hung up is this idea that the left just wants to destroy the country and like tell the stories of the not that they haven't been told, they've been told a million times, but which I guess maybe is disproving my point. Maybe they're not going to listen to that. The Second Amendment. Oh, let me think. The Second Amendment for one, for sure. I think the conspiratorial aspect is maybe the way to turn it. Of like, we're not coming to wreck your country. And it's idiotic to believe. Like, it makes no sense. And here's why. Like, what am I gonna do? Me personally, what is me fighting to take away assault rifles? How is that gonna benefit me? Like, it's not. So it's just kind of hammering that logic home of like, your conspiracy makes no sense. I'm not gonna get any power or control out of you not having a gun. So why do you think that everyone that wants gun control just wants control? Why do you think that? Um, and then I think thirdly, trying to prove that point that I was making earlier about like how driver's licenses and gun licenses could be the exact same thing, and just going through examples of these are things that are parallel to a gun license that we've accepted as a culture because it's something that we've always known. But so if you can literally just think about it as being a driver's license, then you're fine. You don't have less freedom to drive because you need a driver's license. It's not, no one took away your freedom to be able to own a car or to be able to drive a car safely. What they did is they just said, "Hey, we want to make sure you're qualified." And I think that, yeah, if I was making another documentary, I would probably go with those three: Second Amendment, the conspiracy aspect of it, we're not coming for your country, and then the third one being those parallels of like, this is something we already accept, this just accept it on guns as well.
Well, it's interesting because, I've always tried to tell people like, listen, I'm not coming for your guns, but the simplest arguments are always the easiest ones to embrace. The whole like, and it's funny because like, I think that's the hardest thing to do is to convince them that, hey, we're not trying to destroy this country. We're not trying to,
Hmm.
bring the Gestapo to come yank your guns from your safe. Um,
Yeah.
but the thing that irks me the most is the fact that the people who are pro gun just can't find a middle ground, but yet they've found middle ground on things like most of them accept a background check.
Yeah.
That's gun control. That is
Hmm.
that is like the most that you have a felony, you can't even buy one. So
Yeah.
like, how do we? I guess because you've been, you've switched sides. So how did you go from not wanting regulation to accepting regulation? Like, what? I guess I'm harping back on like, how did you get
Yeah.
convinced? How do we form a strategy to convince more people?
Yeah. I it's funny. I've tried to figure out over the past 4 years, like a specific roadmap of how I got from where I was to where I am now. And I have ideas, and I've already been through some of those, but um, it's such a dicey, difficult issue, and the approach. It it feels like guns sometimes are the thing that people care about most in this country on the right. They care more
Mm-hmm.
about guns than they care about anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and that fluctuates and goes back and forth. And sometimes they're focused on social media, which is kind of right now, or
Immigration.
immigration, or being allowed outside their house or whatever. But
Yeah.
at the end of the day, yeah, I think that to your point of like, background checks are gun control. We already do it. But then also joining with them and like, you feel like this is an issue that you're fighting for, this thing makes America better. I am in exactly that same boat. I want a better, safer society in this country. And one of the ways we can do that is by uniting around an effort to have some reasonable regulation on guns. You know, we're never going to be able to solve gun violence. Gun violence is always going to exist in some way, shape, or form, or violence is always going to exist. People will find something to kill someone with if they want to. But basically, that element, like, join with all of us in just trying to make America better and safer and more just and more compassionate. And and it's not about wrecking this country. It's not a conspiracy to break down the fabric of America and turn us away from everything that, conservatives believe made us, the greatest nation on earth. It's literally about progress. I mean, one of the things I love so much about the term progressive, when people describe themselves as progressives, is it literally has inherent to it a constant move forward.
Mm-hmm.
There's never going to be a point, I think, where progressives are like, okay, we've progressed enough. Now we're good. Now we can just not progress anymore. There's always going to be things that progressives are going to want to push for. And I think that so many progressives and leftists and liberals are really just trying to make the country better. And that makes us pretty much at core, we have the same kind of id, if you will, of like that same core drive to improve the country and to make the country safer. We have different ideologies that play into how we do that, but we're not trying to wreck the country. We're trying to keep kids from getting shot in school.
Yeah. So after the Vegas shooting,
Mhm.
I can't remember how long after, but Trump was able to get bump stocks banned.
Yeah,
I've always been like a believer that the saying only Nixon can go to China, you know, and
sure.
only Obama could advance surveillance, and to an
Mhm.
extent, like clearly only Trump could sign a bill that gave every American some money in their hands. Um,
Yeah.
what knowing what you know about the gun culture and the NRA group and the pro gun lobby, what piece besides the bump stocks, because he signed that bill and nobody bitched about it. Um,
Yeah.
what do you think would be like the easiest piece of legislation that they would throw the least amount of shade at?
Um I mean, it's a double-edged sword because on the one hand, if you push for an assault weapons ban, the response from the Ben Shapiros of the world is, well, handguns kill a whole lot more people than assault rifles do. Um, but then if you said, all right, we're going to push to ban handguns, you're not really solving the problem of mass shootings.
Mhm.
And also, they still are going to bitch about that. So I feel like I think there's, to some extent, there has to be a level for policymakers of, like, you really just have to push forward with what needs to be done. Because people are gonna whine about it. There's not really gonna be a way that you can push for meaningful gun legislation, I think, and not piss off gun owners. So it becomes a question of what's something effective and possible. Um, so I don't know. Maybe an assault weapons ban is a decent place to start. I don't know. I don't know how that, like, polls, whether or not that's something that's statistically favorable. I know that there's the expansion of background checks is favorable amongst a majority of NRA supporters. And I believe closing the gun show loophole, a universal background check, I know is positive with NRA members.
Mhm.
Start with that. Like, I think that'd be a great one. Have a federal database and universal background checks. Because then, 3 to 4 years from now, you'll be able to make it, move the dial forward just a little bit more.
Now, one of the most famous gun control, he signed more gun control bills in both as a governor of a large state and as a president. His name is Ronald Reagan.
Mhm.
What has that argument, like, as people in the pro-gun lobby, have they ever like approached that argument? Like why Reagan signed a gun control bill as the governor of California after the Black Panthers started doing street patrols, and also the 86 the 1986, there's the 86 Gun Control Act. What's the gun lobby's thoughts on Reagan's gun grabbing?
I honestly don't know. I never really had those discussions. I do think the Black Panther point is very interesting, especially in light of the tape that was released of him calling people from I believe it was somewhere in Africa, monkeys at the
Yeah.
UN. That it doesn't surprise me that he was a really kind of rabid racist behind the scenes. Um, but I don't know, and that's the thing that can sometimes blow my mind is that you know the gods of conservatism or whatever did some pretty shitty things that but I mean things I mean I approve of gun control, but for a lot of conservatives they would hate that. But like why do you still idolize Reagan? Um and maybe I don't know. Maybe
What?
what it does is it gives a way in of like, see, these people that you really like can agree that maybe these things can be effective for that. Like if you want to solve gun violence, I mean, and he did it for shitty reasons, obviously, but like, was it effective? And even pointing to other nations, Australia, they had a mass shooting in
96, yeah.
I can't remember where it was, 96, what it was called, Port something,
Port Arthur.
Port Arthur, that's it, and then did a complete gun buyback across the country, like banned them to the point where it's almost impossible even to own non-functioning antique firearms in Australia. They've had no mass shootings.
And the funniest part was their prime minister at the time was a conservative.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but like it works. It works. Um, so maybe Reagan got it right, even though it was for awful, shitty reasons.
Well, it's funny because like I live in California, and people that are gun lovers in California hate California, and I have to remind them that the reason why you cannot open carry in most of the state is because of Ronald Reagan, and
Yeah,
they don't, and even like the '94 assault weapons ban, that was co-sponsored by Jimmy Carter, Ronald Reagan, and Gerald Ford.
yeah,
These were, I mean, those guys are country club Republicans. They don't give a
yeah,
shit about
for
guns.
sure.
But the one thing I also wanted to ask you with is, a lot of the conversations you'd have with these people, what did they really say, and what did they hint at? Like, what are some things you can kind of expose about like how they really felt about about guns and other types of social issues?
I don't know if there's necessarily anything to expose, but I think that for the amount of times that conservatives scoff at this perceived leftist disdain of like or liberal disdain of like Hillary Clinton called us deplorables and that's disgusting, and I mean there's so much of that within the gun, like the gun rights groups of like this sense of these idiots that don't understand the statistics about saving yourself with the gun if you're ever at a mall and someone walks in with an AR. Like I had those discussions, and we would have those conversations pretty regularly amongst our crew, and it was just this disdain right back to them of like they're looking down on us thinking that they're so smart, but really we have the facts on our side. um I mean so just know that anytime that right wingers complain or bitch about the left looking down on them for owning guns, just know it's a two-way street.
Mm-hmm.
It goes both ways. Um, and yeah, I'll give that a lot of liberals and leftists look down on the gun-toting, apple pie eating country boys. I will give them that. but that doesn't necessarily mean we're wrong. It just means that sometimes we're assholes about it.
Oh, that's beautiful. And you know what? I have to kind of stop myself from thinking that way too, because I don't want to be this, perceived as this liberal elitist, but when I go on my Facebook feed and all of my conservative friends, the fastest way that they get, 50 likes on a picture is a picture of them holding a gun and wearing a Confederate flag T-shirt. It's kind of hard not to,
Yeah.
and I to me, it's almost like, do you think we're so polarized now, especially with Trump, that we're probably not going to come to any type of middle ground on any of these issues, especially like a hot button one like guns?
Yeah, I don't know. I think that that's probably fair to say that. I mean, I think that we're even seeing it with the protests and everything that's going on around the country, that we are at a pinnacle point. I mean, and obviously these protests are not related to guns in any way, but we're at a pivotal point in where we're going to go as a country. And that a lot of this is happening because of Trump and because of the way that he polarized his base. And that on the gun issue, I don't know what middle ground looks like. I think I still hold out hope that there can be something that isn't, we're passing a law and then we're forcing you to give your guns back. I would way, way, way rather people willingly come forward and say, you know what, I'm going to think about kids at the schools in my neighborhoods and vote for a universal background check or vote for people that are going to put universal background checks into legislation. And that there's definitely still a chance. I think there's still a chance on a lot of issues that we can achieve good policy goals without it needing to be overly polarized, but that we still definitely that's still a possibility. And I think a lot of that's going to ride on what happens in November. Honestly, if we have another 4 years of this, I have no idea what's going to happen.
And I was gonna get your take on that, since you were clearly anti-Trump even before he was elected. What are your thoughts on his chances of re-election this year?
Oh man, I like to think he's going to lose. I'm not overly qualified to talk about his chances. I know what I've read, which is that I think that there's a chance that Biden wins. I think a lot of it depends on how the economy looks with COVID by the time that November rolls around, and a lot rides on how everything ends up shaking out in the next few weeks or months with the continuation of BLM protests across the country, and that he definitely has a chance. But I don't think that it's as clear cut as it was, a month ago when Bernie Sanders dropped out, where it was like Joe Biden and Trump. Absolutely, I think Trump would have sealed it. But then kind of Corona really becoming a bigger deal and the economy starting to crash and unemployment spiking, I think that there's a chance that Biden's able to eke something out. But I don't know. Again, like I said, I'm not in any way qualified to be able to talk about that beyond just the things that I've read and the minimal research that I've done.
Yeah. Now, what are some other things that you really kind of enjoy talking about with your story? Like, is there any other fun little anecdotes to bring up, or just any war stories from when you were on the road shooting the film?
I got off an airplane right behind Henry Winkler, and I didn't realize that it was Henry Winkler until he was like 100 yards away. I was getting off the back of the plane because of course I was, and he was getting off the front of the plane. He was on the phone, and I was like, he looks super familiar. I have no idea. Like, we ran into each other, and I was like, go for it. And I was like, I have no idea why he looks so familiar. I must have seen him when we were getting on the plane. And I'm walking with him through the airport for like a good, 100 feet, 200 feet, and then I stopped to wait for my dad. And I was like, oh my God, that was Henry Winkler. And missed a chance to, which at the time I didn't know a ton of Henry Winkler's work. And then now there's basically, he was in Arrested Development, and it's like my favorite sitcom of all time, and Barry with Bill Hader, which is just genius. He was in Parks and Rec. And so I wish that I had a chance to actually say hello or whatever, but I missed that. That's one fun story. Any war stories? Ooh. Not really. It was pretty smooth. I mean, there was a lot of B-roll that we shot on the National Mall in Washington, D.C., and the middle of the National Mall is a good half mile to a mile away from any bathrooms. And we definitely had some instances where we were out shooting and we were like, we have to pack up and go right now because one of us is going to explode.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Now, during the during the distribution of the film, what type of backlash did you receive from leftists or liberals that you didn't appreciate, or maybe like what are some things that they criticized you or how they criticized you that kind of irked you, and that that we should kind of shy away from doing on this issue?
I don't feel like it happened a whole lot, honestly. I think that it was to such a slim audience and had such a specific message and specific kind of people that would appreciate what we were saying. I don't feel like I got a ton of backlash publicly. Yeah, it really wasn't, like I said, the audience, it was tailored to a specific audience and specific likes and specific kind of policy ideas. And so we didn't get a whole lot of, liberal people saying anything to us or even really watching it.
Nobody chased you down with pitchforks or anything like that?
Nope. Nope.
Now,
Yeah, it was pretty calm.
now, you talked about how, like, Dianne Feinstein and Nancy Pelosi like refused to even speak with you. What are some other things that like that kind of irks the gun lobby the most? Like what I'm looking for is like, what are some ways that us on the left should not approach the pro-gun right? Like, what are some things we shouldn't do?
Take them seriously, if you want me to be honest about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like I honestly feel like it's sometimes it has to get to a point where you just have to ridicule it, and it's absurd. And these weekend warrior, looking like they, retired from the Navy SEALs with, combat vests and combat boots and ARs and, tactical helmets and whatever. It's so funny. It's absurd. It's ridiculous. And so I feel like if you take them seriously, that's what they want. Like if you treat them like, okay, this is a serious person that I need to have a serious conversation with. And obviously I'm talking about really extreme gun people. Like your average, person that has a gun or two in their house, probably don't laugh at them. But I think that for the gun lobby on the whole, the thing that can delegitimize them is just that of like, don't take it seriously. Like, why would I need a gun because the New York Times printed an article about Trump you don't like? Like, why do you need a gun? And finding that balance of when it's appropriate to, okay, let's have a discussion, and when it's appropriate to just be like, you're an idiot, I'll see you. Like, you're like, I'm not even going to talk with you. And I think that a lot of that comes down to if people seem as though they're willing to a couple things. If they seem as though they're willing to listen and have a discussion, and two, if it's something where there's a possibility of changing minds. Like, I heard someone say recently, like, I'm not going to have a debate with a member of the KKK about racism, because I know that their mind is so firmly entrenched in a disgusting position that they're not going to listen, and they're not going to have their mind changed by a debate. Someone on, a gun issue, you could probably have a debate, and then that person might go away and say, "Oh, that's really interesting. I'm going to do more research," and then possibly change their mind on something. That's happened to me. It's happened to people in my family in conversations I've had with them, where we'll say something, have a discussion or debate, and then go away, and then the next day we call each other or whatever, and we're like, "So I did more research on that thing you said, and you're absolutely right." So like, be willing to have discussions, but also don't take them too seriously when they're ridiculous.
Like when they start grandstanding and all that kind of stuff, like
Yeah.
"This is my
Or
right."
like out with guns in the state house in Michigan.
Oh God, those
Like,
guys.
those people do not deserve to be taken seriously in any way.
No, and what's funny is they're getting what they want. They're getting what they want is their picture taken.
Mhm.
They want the attention. Like
Mhm.
every gun owner that has a social media account has a picture with them holding their gun. I mean,
Yeah.
you don't stand next to your safe and go, "Fuck yeah, look at this safe," or the
Yeah.
locks on your door.
Look how safe I am. This
Look
has
how
a 6-digit code.
Yeah,
Yeah,
look at my alarm,
exactly.
baby. Look at my house alarm, or look at my
Yeah,
airbags, bro, in my car.
exactly. Exactly.
But I think that's a really
Yeah.
interesting point that you say, like, don't take him seriously. And it's funny because, like, at times I have to, because I'm like, this guy's nuts. Like, we have to take him seriously because, we need to deal with him almost. And, you saying what you're saying kind of makes sense. It's like, hey, if we just laugh this guy off and not give him the attention he's looking for, it makes sense. It does make a lot of sense. Um, we're getting a little bit short on time here. I don't want to take too much of your time.
For sure.
Um, so I want to end it with, what have you been up to lately, and what are some of your plans for the
Yeah.
future?
So I actually, I guess it was early 2018, I had never graduated college. I never went to college, actually. I decided to go to college. Um, and so I'm currently on break, but I'm starting my senior year in the fall. And believe it or not, I am majoring in musical theater. Um, which is kind of, I know, a shocking departure from a guy making a documentary on gun rights to, you know, wearing, ballet shoes or whatever. Um, Not that I'm a dancer, I'm a terrible dancer, but musical theater is the goal, or the degree, anyways. But what I'm really wanting to kind of focus in on, and what I've been doing recently, is specifically playwriting, and acting, just like straight play acting. Um, but I feel like especially playwriting kind of is able to kind of satisfy a lot of different um, interests that I have. One in theater, two in writing, but three, you can tell really, you can get very political in theater in ways that you can't even sometimes in film.
Mhm.
And so you just have this opportunity to have a really kind of unique medium that has a real sense of immediacy with an audience, and write something that can make them really think about the world or think about themselves. So that's something that I'm really interested in doing and continuing to pursue. Yeah, and then I'm just doing my thing, working over the summer, and just keeping busy, playing a lot of Call of Duty in quarantine.
Yeah, I've been playing a lot of video games, a lot of Prison Architect, a lot of World of Warcraft too. So
Oh,
yeah,
nice,
no,
very nice.
I'm glad to see that you're chasing a dream there, though, bro. It's good. It's kind of weird. You go from filming a documentary, which is a tremendous achievement. It's something I've always wanted to do, but I don't have the funds, or I don't know if I'd be good enough to do that kind of stuff. But no, it's good to see you chasing your dreams. And oh, I forgot one last question. This is a question I always ask people. Um, Obviously now you're left leaning.
Hmm.
What is the one issue in which you still lean to the right on, or have always been a little to the right on?
Ooh. I think probably the farthest right that I would be is that I'm still generally okay with people having guns.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that regulated, really, really tightly regulated firearm ownership, I don't inherently have a problem with. Like, I get the whole argument about, using them for sport and shooting and just, for your own enjoyment. I get that. I don't want to necessarily take that away from people carte blanche. But it depends on the day on that too. Sometimes I'm just like, yeah, take them and burn them. But I think on any day that I'm being somewhat reasonable, that's I'm fine with that, and that's probably the farthest right that I would go, is that I could agree with someone and like, yeah, having a gun is fine. I don't necessarily have a problem with that. Other than that, though, I'm pretty much as far left as you could push.
Yeah, it's incredible to hear that. It really is. And yeah. So we'll go ahead and stop it there. I just want to say thank you so much for this. It's been really
Yeah,
eye-opening, and just I've learned so much from you. So
absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on. Really appreciated it. Anytime, I'm always down to just chat about politics, even if there's nothing specific to talk about.
Well, that's what I was gonna ask you. Is down the road, I've been streaming a lot lately, and I'm always looking for more. This has probably been probably the best stream I think I've ever had. It's been the most
Oh,
interesting.
thank
So
you.
yeah, we really appreciate that. So
Yeah,
right on. All right. Well, let me
absolutely.